shelter where we get those clear skies. A bright but chilly start in these locations, and then the last of Storm Barrow. This area of cloud and some showers moves east through Thursday morning, clearing by lunchtime, so a decent chance of sunshine in the east by the afternoon, whilst further west the cloud builds and another spell of rain moves in. It also brings milder air, 12 Celsius in the southwest, whilst it stays cold, 6 or 7 further east. And here's that band of showery rain. Nothing too problematic. It moves east for most places during Thursday afternoon and evening, clearing during the early hours, I think, from the far southeast. Then, once that's out of the way, we're into a clear spells and showery regime, with those showers pushing quite quickly into western areas, whilst clearing skies further east could lead to a touch of frost in some sheltered spots, but most places frost-free because of the breeze, I think, on Friday morning. The best of the sunshine on Friday will be in the east, perhaps the Midlands and southern England as well. However, in the northwest and west, we'll see frequent showers moving in, hail and thunder, snow over the mountains, and it will feel cold in the breeze. Saturday starts off chilly before rain arrives later, milder in the south on Sunday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier. If you're just catching up on the news tonight, we can tell you that Boris Johnson has hit the COVID panic button, and from next week, new restrictions will be in place. From Monday, there will be a return in England to working from home as the government's medical advisors say the number of new COVID cases is doubling every 2 or 3 days. For those in Cabinet who've reportedly been arguing against vaccine passports, well, it appears tonight they've lost that battle. Proof of vaccines will be required for nightclubs and certain larger venues. We'll be talking to a nightclub owner. Also tonight, why was the Westminster bubble of political journalists determined, it seems, to press on tonight with questions about a Christmas party that took place a year ago? The Brazier angle asks whether sometimes the lobby has to learn to let things go. All that's coming up, but first, a news update with Simon.
Thank you, Colin. I'm Simon Pusey. These are your latest headlines. The Prime Minister has announced England will move to Plan B COVID restrictions to curb the spread of the new variant. Across the UK, 131 additional Omicron cases have been confirmed today, bringing the total number of infections to 568. Boris Johnson is urging those who can to work from home from Monday. NHS vaccine passports will be mandatory in nightclubs, and from this Friday, face coverings will be compulsory in crowded indoor spaces, including cinemas and theatres.
Since I last spoke to you, it's become increasingly clear that Omicron is growing much faster than the previous Delta variant, and it's spreading rapidly all around the world. So while the picture may get better, and I sincerely hope that it will, we know that the remorseless logic of exponential growth could lead to a big rise in hospitalisations and therefore, sadly, in deaths. And that's why it's now the proportionate and the responsible thing to move to Plan B in England.
Meanwhile, the Met Police say they won't, at this stage, formally investigate allegations around the Downing Street Christmas party allegedly held under lockdown restrictions. It follows a leaked video obtained by ITV News, which shows an advisor to the Prime Minister joking about an alleged party held in Number 10 in December of last year. Allegra Stratton was seen laughing with other staff about cheese and wine during a mock briefing 4 days after the event. Boris Johnson told MPs he was furious with the conduct of his staff and ordered an investigation. Hours later, Ms Stratton announced her resignation.
My remarks seemed to make light of the rules that people were doing everything to obey. That was never my intention. I will regret those remarks for the rest of my days, and I offer my profound apologies to all of you at home for them. I understand the anger and frustration that people feel. To all of you who lost loved ones, who endured intolerable loneliness, and who struggled with your businesses, I am truly sorry, and this afternoon I am offering my resignation to the Prime Minister.
Allegra Stratton speaking there. Now, a new poll shows most people think the lockdown Christmas party did happen despite Number 10's denial. The poll by Opinium found fewer than 1 in 10 voters believe Downing Street's claim that no party took place. 64% think the event happened, with 9% saying it didn't. And for the first time, the majority of voters, that's 53%, think Boris Johnson should resign as Prime Minister.
Opinion poll out today showed that the majority of the country, for the first time, a majority think that he should resign from the job that he's doing. The vast majority don't trust and believe that what he says. So he isn't a particularly popular politician. More people think that the moon landings were faked than think the Prime Minister is telling the truth about this story.
There we go. You're right up to date. Now back to Brazier.
Hi there. Well, less than 2 hours ago, Boris Johnson told 56 million people in England that they face tighter COVID restrictions. The Prime Minister says the measures, which are part of the Plan B, so-called Plan B option that was first released in September, are now needed to combat the spread of the Omicron variant. It was announced this afternoon that another 131 cases of that variant have been identified in the UK. That was on Wednesday, taking the total to 568. Relatively small numbers now, but it's what may be around the corner. Our London correspondent, Alice Porter, has been looking at what the new restrictions are.
In one of Boris Johnson's most dramatic 24 hours in office, he's announced that Plan B COVID restrictions will be reintroduced in England. So what's new? From Monday, workers will be advised to work from home if possible. Current rules on face masks will be extended on Friday to include most public venues, including cinemas and theatres. And COVID passes proving whether a person has been vaccinated or had a negative test will be required at nightclubs and venues with large crowds. This announcement comes as leaked minutes reveal scientists' fears that the hospital admissions due to the new Omicron variant could reach at least 1,000 a day if restrictions aren't toughened.
There is a delay between people becoming infected with COVID and ending up with symptoms and then with hospitalisation. So there's usually about a 2-week delay. We would therefore not expect that these cases, that the case rates in hospital will start to go up for a number of probably 2 to 3 weeks. And in that period, if you're doubling up at the speed we're talking about now, we move from very small numbers to really substantial numbers, and it will keep on doubling. And that really is the reason why these measures have been announced by the Prime Minister.
The PM has fallen short of asking people to change their Christmas plans. But after the events of last winter, many people will be fearful of what could lie in the weeks ahead. Alice Porter, GB News.
Well, there was the Prime Minister some while ago in Downing Street. Let's turn to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is there live for us now. Hi to you, Darren. I'm going to try and do something fairly unfashionable, I imagine, this evening, which is to seek to defend the actions of Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, faced with what Sage heard yesterday, faced with this dread word, exponential increase in the number of cases. In terms of Plan B, he could do no other.
Yeah, and I think that is certainly what the scientists, what Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance have been saying to the Prime Minister. It is the reason that we are moving to Plan B. They have pointed to, and yes, it is still preliminary data, but they have pointed to what has happened in South Africa, where cases have been rising at an exponential rate. If you look at them, they are literally almost vertical. Hospitalizations have doubled in a week. Now, we're not South Africa. Vaccination rates here are higher, but the concern is merely about transmissibility. And I say transmissibility, Colin, because in many ways this is key in all of this. Severity, of course, of the illness is really, really important. And there are suggestions, again, preliminary suggestions, that it might actually be a bit milder than the Delta variants. Those that potentially suffer a severe disease, particularly vaccinated people, is incredibly small. However, if it is a lot more transmissible, and there was talk it could be 1, 2, 3 times more transmissible than Delta, that means lots and lots of people getting it at the one time. And that means that even though it's relatively severe for a relatively small number of people, if you get millions literally potentially catching it all at the one time, you still end up with an absolutely large number of people potentially putting strain on the National Health Service at a time in which it is already under strain, and in a season in which it traditionally buckles sometimes under the pressure. And so that is the thought process, I think, within government about trying to impose these restrictions. I think the bigger question in some regards, though, is, will this be enough? Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, last week said actually lots of the restrictions, such as wearing face masks indoor in bigger venues like theatres and cinemas, or vaccine passports, which have already been in place in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland for some time, don't really seem to have made a massive impact there. The rates of coronavirus cases pretty similar to what we've got elsewhere in England. And, while this might help slow things down, there is little doubt, I think, ultimately, that Omicron, the new variant, is likely to become the dominant variant here in England and indeed in the rest of the UK. The question is about when, and what they want to do is slow down the number of times the case rate doubles. At the moment, it's every 2 to 3 days. They're hoping even just get that down to 4 to 5 days. They think that might relieve some of the pressure.
As you say, Darren, quite rightly, it's simply a question of whether that will demand further restrictions above and beyond what we are currently looking at. That is the open and vital question right now. Darren McCaffrey, our thanks to you this evening. Thanks a lot. Well, according to Sir Chris Whitty, in South Africa, there was, as Darren was saying, a 300% increase in hospitalisations over the last week alone, obviously where the Omicron variant was first detected in South Africa. Chris Whitty also said in that press conference that cases in the UK are currently doubling between every 2 and 3 days. Well, joining me now, Senior Clinical Lecturer at Exeter University, David Strain. David, thank you so much for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. What makes Omicron quite so transmissible? What is it about its mutations that make it so very good at replicating itself and being caught by people?
So one of the things that is making it so easily transmissible is that it has lots of changes compared to the Delta variant, and the vast majority of us have been into contact with the Delta variant, so we have a little bit of immunity against it. The majority of us have been vaccinated, but this Omicron variant has got a few mutations on it that mean the antibodies we created to either the vaccine and definitely to the Delta variant are not effective at slowing down transmission. Now, the other ways that it could be causing this increased transmission is that spike protein, the bit that actually joins in with our cells, has a better lock to enter, sorry, a better key to enter the lock that is your cells, which means you may need a smaller quantity of the Omicron variant to enter your body. And then the third way, and the way that the Delta variant became so dominant, was it just produces many, many more copies. That means one individual could be carrying 1,000 times more copies of the virus, which means they can spread it to many more people that previously wouldn't have got it from them.
What do you make of this idea? It's been in circulation for a week or two now, that actually we may be, this may be wishful thinking, but we may be witnessing a natural evolutionary process which sees over time the movement from pandemic to endemic, something becoming actually more benign, more common, but more benign, and rather more akin to the common cold. I'm guessing the answer to that question is simply, we do not know yet, we remain hopeful.
Well, you're absolutely right. We don't know for certain, but it is the natural history of most pathogens, most viruses, that they eventually do less damage to their host. Remember, it's not in the virus's best interest to kill off its host. It wants to spread and replicate as much as possible. So it is hopeful that Omicron, or whatever the next variant is more benign, which leaves us in a position where this is, as you say, nothing more than a severe cold. And remember, just because it is becoming the dominant variant so quickly, it's playing on an uneven playing field. In South Africa, 98% of the population are immune to the Delta variant. But this is very, very different to the Delta variant. But in South Africa, they don't have the same vaccination program. So what you're faced here is an Omicron variant that looks completely different, that can have carte blanche over your immune system, racing against a Delta variant with some background immunity. It's like me racing with Usain Bolt, but him being wading through treacle and me having a nice running track. I would beat him in that situation, even though Usain Bolt is a much, much faster runner. It may be that the Delta variant is being dominated by the Omicron, not because Omicron is more aggressive, but simply because the Delta variant has got a much more difficult job to deal with the vaccination and the natural immunity that's being seen in South Africa.
David, for those people who find themselves hospitalised, presumably, increasingly by Omicron, will the treatments, do we believe the treatments, things like, we were very early on to dexamethasone, but the subsequent antiviral treatments, which have shown so much promise, do we believe that they will be as effective against this new variant as they have been against Delta and others?
Yeah, there are three broad groups of drugs that we're using at the moment. There's the anti-inflammatories, that's the dexamethasone, and we believe that will be potent against any version. That's working very, very generically. There's then the very specific antivirals, this new drug, the tablets or the injections, molnupiravir, and that works on any viral replication. So we are pretty confident that that will also be just as effective against this variant when people are hospitalized. The one where there is some doubt is the monoclonal antibody. Basically, we find the antibodies that the vaccine should have been making and give you a big dose of that. That's specifically for the immunocompromised people who didn't respond right to the vaccine. That's the one treatment that we have some doubts as to how effective it's going to be. All that being said, generating new antibodies is a relatively easy process. Now that we know that it works, that's something that we may have on our shelves in a couple of months with a specific Omicron antibody. In the same way Chris Whitty was alluding to, that in the next 2 to 3 months, we might have a specific Omicron booster dose.
How alarmed ought we to be? How alarmed do you think Chris Whitty was in that press conference about the rate of reproduction of this virus, that it seems to be heading into relatively uncharted territory, a doubling of cases every 2 or 3 days? We were back to the graphs, we were back to some fairly terrifying projections, and projections which to the layperson like me would suggest that actually, for all we may not be going to work and working from home on Monday, there may be more restrictions in store if it turns out that this particular variant is as hazardous as we fear it might be.
Yeah, that's always the fear. And at this moment in time, we genuinely don't know which way it's going to go. Remember that this spread of doubling every 2 to 3 days is what we saw right at the beginning of the pandemic, when actually very few of the restrictions were in place. A few were wearing masks, but the vast majority were meeting normally. And we saw those sorts of projections then. This doubling every 2 to 3 days is definitely concerning. If it turns out that the Omicron variant is also as painful as the Delta variant, that it causes hospitalizations, because even if it only causes hospitalizations in less than 1%, as we're seeing in the vaccinated population and the boosted population, less than 1% of a huge number of people catching the Omicron variant will put unnecessary stress across the entire system. And again, we will start to see large losses of life. And if that is the case, and I'm stressing if, we will probably end up in a position where further restrictions come into play, where we may see the hospitality industry suffering again, because obviously that is one place where it becomes a little bit more difficult to have any sorts of physical distancing or mask wearing, for example.
Here we are on the 8th of December having this conversation. There'll be Christmas parties. The hospitality industry you mentioned there will be praying for a return to some kind of business trading normality. Are we suggesting tonight there is every possibility that trading period over Christmas, so vital to small businesses, especially in hospitality, but elsewhere too, may be in jeopardy?
It is absolutely impossible to say. And actually, the best way of preventing the hospitality industry and us all missing out on our parties is for those who are eligible, get the vaccine, get your booster. We know that the booster vaccine, even though it may not prevent transmission, is going to be stopping people from being hospitalized. Before you're getting together as a group, do the lateral flow test. There's good evidence now that the lateral flow test can pick up the Omicron variant. And that is the single best way you've got of finding out whether you are carrying any virus in your nose. And if it tests positive, there's virus there. Don't go out and party and spread it around. If it tests negative and all of your colleagues and peers are also testing negative, then the risk of you having it and being in an infectious state is relatively small. It's not to say you won't have it, but if it's not in your nose, it is very unlikely to cause you any problems and to spread around the party that you're with. And these very simple measures can enable us to celebrate Christmas, to enjoy Christmas in a cautious manner. The bit where it becomes slightly more hazardous is when we all go out and start mixing with people that we don't know what their status is. We don't know about their lateral flow status and whether we're looking at a fully vaccinated group. That's where things could be a little more hazardous, and that's where some caution is undoubtedly going to be required.
Final thought, really, and it's the question of how the government approaches that bigger question of mandatory vaccines. There is a suspicion, I dare say, some people will be harbouring tonight, perhaps even I harbour it, which is that at a time of what feels like emergency, that may be the time most tempting for the government to say, as other governments have done across Europe, and indeed Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, has suggested, that the best way of making sure that people have got all the cover that science can provide is by mandating vaccines. Where do you stand on that?
I firmly believe that vaccination is good for you and good for the people around you, both the original course and your booster. However, more so, I believe in the freedom that every single person in this country has over their own body. So whereas I would actively encourage anyone, and I will spend literally hours convincing people and going through the evidence that this is the right thing to do, I would never, as a physician, be in a position where I would hold somebody down and give them a vaccine that was against their will.
Yeah, a compulsory medical procedure. Well, we very much appreciate that perspective, if only it was more widely shared in every part of our medical profession. David Strain, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate it. After the break, will children go back to homeschooling? We'll discuss that.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Gradually through the next 24 hours, the wind is going to ease. Showers will ease with a better chance of some sunshine in places by Thursday. However, some more rain will move in from the west later in the day. Storm Barra is filling and moving away. As a result, the wind, on the whole, starting to lessen during the next 24 hours. And any showery rain that's still wrapped around that area of low pressure will also tend to disappear. But it's going to take some time, so further showers in places through the central zones and northwestern areas overnight. A better chance, though, in places of some clear spells developing through the night. And with those winds coming down, a touch of frost possible for parts of northern England, Scotland, for example, Northern Ireland, where we get some shelter, where we get those clear skies. A bright but chilly start in these locations, and then the last of Storm Barra, this area of cloud and some showers, moves east through Thursday morning, clearing by lunchtime, so a decent chance of sunshine in the east by the afternoon, whilst further west the cloud builds and another spell of rain moves in. It also brings milder air, 12 Celsius in the southwest, whilst it stays cold, 6 or 7 further east. And here's that band of showery rain. Nothing too problematic. It moves east for most places during Thursday afternoon and evening, clearing during the early hours, I think, from the far southeast. Then, once that's out of the way, we're into a clear spells and showery regime, with those showers pushing quite quickly into western areas, whilst clearing skies further east could lead to a touch of frost in some sheltered spots, but most places frost-free because of the breeze, I think, on Friday morning. The best of the sunshine on Friday will be in the east, perhaps the Midlands and southern England as well. However, in the northwest and west, we'll see frequent showers moving in, hail and thunder, snow over the mountains, and it will feel cold in the breeze. Saturday starts off chilly before rain arrives later, milder in the south on Sunday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, if you've been wondering today, perhaps talking it through with friends, family, colleagues, whether Christmas was going to be normal, this Christmas, it's a question mark still, frankly. Boris Johnson has announced within the last couple of hours that Plan B restrictions are being introduced. This is in England. Let's try and explain what that means in practice. From Friday, masks must be worn in most indoor and outdoor areas, including theatres, cinemas and restaurants. From Wednesday, a COVID status is essential to enter a building exceeding 500 people indoors, some nightclubs, and more than 4,000 attendees outdoors, so football matches and the like. A COVID status refers to proof of vaccine passports or a negative coronavirus test. There's been a battle in Cabinet, it's been reported, between those who've been fighting off the passport, and those in favour. It does appear one side has come out on top. From Monday, people should return to working from home where that is possible. Welcome back to a world, at least for a while, of emptier trains and quieter roads, perhaps. Well, joining me now, Kerry Cooper, Professor of Psychology and Health at Manchester Business School. Professor, thanks so much for your time. Do appreciate it. In all this, and from the very beginning, and we know that SAGE has factored in group psychology at scale to try and work out how the public respond to these types of measures. There is the sensitivity around Christmas that people attach, for obvious reasons, so much emotional significance to it. So the government will be treading carefully, but all the while aware of this data from South Africa and elsewhere that they have to take action.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what they did last September, they acted too slowly. We had the Delta virus come through, 20,000 people flying in for weeks from India with the Delta virus. So they've taken action quickly. They have no option now, given their kind of failure last year. So nevertheless, we are where we are. And some of the restrictions, in a sense, Colin, like work from home if you can. And you know what? Since the opening up, as it were, people have been working substantially from home anyway and going into the work. The hybrid model is now the predominant model of work now, where people work substantially from home but go into work for 1, 2, occasionally 3 days a week. So they have been using their home base as their main working place, but going into the workplace more than when obviously they were totally locked down and working 100% remotely. So I was going to make the point that it's interesting. It's still an unresolved question, actually. We were talking about it only yesterday evening on the show in the context of what had happened at the Foreign Office, where people were working from home in great numbers. And actually what was missing and what that meant was, at the time of the Afghanistan crisis, Taliban pouring into Kabul, you didn't have that sort of mass of people working together, eavesdropping on colleagues just over there, because they were all doing it on Zoom, and that group dynamic becomes very different. So that conversation remains unresolved. People will presumably on Monday just go back to doing the Zoom meetings, etc., etc. But that is something that people have got their heads around already, isn't it? That's the downside. But Colin, pre-COVID, funny enough, I did a scientific book called Flexible Work, which came out in May of 2020. But I've asked scientists across the globe, could they review the evidence on flexible working? This was before COVID. Is there higher job satisfaction, less illness, less stress from commuting? What's your performance like? And it was all positive. People didn't work more flexibly, i.e., by flexible, I don't mean remote. I mean working partly from home and partly from the central office environment. This is what people wanted pre-COVID. On balance, they didn't take it because they thought that would send the message to their employer that they weren't committed. And since the pandemic, people, when they had to work remotely, by the way, the evidence was people pre-COVID didn't want to work 100% remote, not at all. Their social needs have to be met and are met by going to work. They have to team build. They have to plan new products and services and that. The flexible model says you go into the work environment when you're needed in the work environment. That is to decide on if you were in the Department of Health or somewhere like that, or having to make decisions in the Foreign Office, you'd all come in during an emergency to sort that out, because that's what it would require. The same thing would apply if you were a private sector body and you were developing a new product. In developing that new product, and that new product, for example, could be a vaccine, right? So you might all have to come in now because we have to get this new variant. We got to get a new vaccine for this variant, and you would come in. But normally you wouldn't necessarily need to be in 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And that's what people who don't have to work at the coalface wanted, still wanted, and substantially a lot of the conferences and business meetings a lot of them are still online, or there's a hybrid model where some people come in and other people stay at home and you combine the two.
Kerry, can we just talk a little bit about the sorts of things that psychologists like you will be feeding into the to the decision-making that's going on in Downing Street. I mean, we have talked a lot recently about compliance fatigue, and, you know, it was interesting seeing Chris Whitty tonight and remembering right at the start of all this, and he was saying that we can't go too early because people will that they won't wear it. They won't wear it over time. And I wonder what, as a psychologist, you're making of the patterns of behaviour you're witnessing, because there's no question, it seems to me, that there's clearly a radicalising element to all this. Previous conversation just had about mandatory vaccines. I mean, who would have thought a year ago that we would be talking about Western governments like the Austrians and the Greeks, and even the head of the European Commission, talking about mandatory vaccinations, a mandatory medical procedure that people would have to submit to. And that must have and has had a radicalising effect.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you what I'm worried about, Colin. I'm worried about the mixed messaging. And really, I do, in a sense, think the Prime Minister is partly responsible for that. And the whole of, if you look at the House of Commons over the last few months, and you looked at the Conservative side of the House of Commons, they weren't masked at all. Whether all the people on the opposition, whether it was the SNP or Labour or Lib Dems, they were all masked. That sent a bad message. And I think when he went to Hexham Hospital, that sent a bad message that he didn't wear it. I think that's mixed. And what that does, in my view, psychologically, is for those people who are, want freedom, as if, by the way, the virus can distinguish those people who want freedom from those people who don't, because we're not free. Viruses don't do that. They don't discriminate between people's attitude to be free and not be free. They just expand and transmit. So my own worry is that the people who are naturally kind of what we call in the psychology trade counter-dependent, they don't want authority to tell them what to do. I think they will be given license and permission by the behavior of senior leaders to carry on not masking, not vaxxing. And that's the worry I have. The worry I have is the mixed messaging and the behavior of senior leaders and other politicians as well.
I would draw just on the point about messaging, I think I would draw a big distinction between somebody not vaxxing and somebody choosing not to wear a mask and somebody having misgivings about compulsory vaccinations. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of attitudes.
The mandatory thing, I think I agree with Dr. Strain on that, but it's not about that. I'm just worried people who are reticent to take the vaccine, but for individual freedom reasons, rather than I'm worried because I have a pre-existing condition. I'm worried about those people and the people who don't want to take the mask and who are counter-dependent and don't like authority telling them what to do. I think those people will be reinforced by the behavior of leaders.
Well,
by the way they act.
And they will say they are looking at the evidence as they see it and arriving at their own conclusions. Kerry Cooper, that's a conversation for another time. I appreciate your time this evening. Thanks very much. As more restrictions have been introduced, many have started to question whether these will be extended to education, perhaps not imminently, but over the Christmas period, perhaps into the new year, with many children still playing catch-up in the classroom. A move to online learning could make and leave them ultimately further behind. Could the closure of schools be part of the answer to stopping the spread of the Omicron variant? Can't believe I'm even asking that question. Joining us now, Christine Brett, the founder of Us for Them. Christine, welcome to you. Heaven forfend schools start closing early for Christmas.
Oh, I mean, to be honest, they are de facto closing anyway. We have in my son's school a whole year group out already because the teachers are off. So I think, the reality is if schools will end up closing through mass isolations, even if it's not an explicit order from the government. And I think the government need to recognise that it's because of these measures and because of these policies that they're closing. And we know how damaging this is for children. We know there's already been 1 billion days of education lost. We heard from Ofsted this week that all children have suffered as a result of these lockdowns. We know that there are safeguarding failures, like the case of Arthur that was highlighted, that came about in part because of the, lack of safeguarding measures that are in place. We know that children's mental health has deteriorated over this time, and it just feels like we're piling more and more onto children who are, the least, affected by this virus, and yet the measures will just harm them the most and for the longest period.
I mean, in all this, that there's been, I think, a sense from some parents, and it's wonderful that you are one of the few people who can stand there as somebody willing to be an advocate of that often lost voice in this conversation, which is the voice of parents, and often it's drowned out by stronger, more militant, more organised voices, particularly from the teaching unions, who I think it's not unreasonable to say sometimes have chosen a line of least resistance when it comes to the safety questions around going in, whether to wear masks, how long to spend in the classroom, when to go on holiday.
Yeah, I mean, and sadly, you know, the unions already this evening with this new work from home mandate, the unions already crying for greater restrictions to be brought in for school across the board. And I know that, you know, on an individual level, most of the teachers recognise that the children need to be in school to learn effectively. I think we have unequivocal evidence now that remote learning is only a partial substitute for education, face-to-face education. And, you know, most teachers recognise that children are already behind. They need to have that interaction and they need it for their well-being. And I think, you know, all these people coming on and talking quite academically about the measures that have been introduced today, the reality for children is if their parents are now working from home in a one-bedroom flat and are stressed and are trying to do jobs and all the rest of it, it's going to have an impact on their lives. And they've already suffered enormously in this period. We're coming up for nearly 2 years now. That's a long time in the life of a child. You know, it's like 40% of a 5-year-old's life has now been spent in this way, and they're only just at school and they're already having that uncertainty of, are schools going to close? Are they going to go back after Christmas? Are they even going to make it until the Christmas holidays? You know, the plays are being cancelled, the carol concerts are off, you know, the nativities are off, and yet they can see that the politicians are partying. And I think that's the mixed messaging that we're having here, is that the adults are carrying on having their Christmas parties, but sadly, the children can't have their carol concerts.
You're talking, Christine, got a text from my daughter at university saying, don't forget about the university students. We've been badly affected and continue to be affected by things like online lectures as well. Christine Brett, really good to talk to you this evening. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. After the break, will the nighttime industries survive more restrictions, particularly over the Christmas period?
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, should the death penalty be reintroduced for child killers after the murder of Arthur Labinjo Hughes? I'll get your verdict in the clash. Is the Together movement our best hope of saving us from vaccine passports? Alan Miller, one of the coalition's major figures and co-founder of Open for All, joins me in Uncancelled. Plus, GB News star Mark Dolan gives his verdict on a crazy week, and I'll break down the day's top headlines with my superstar panel. Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, Conservative commentator Dominique Samuels, and the broadcaster and author Amy Nicole. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, if you haven't heard, maybe if you're just switching on, big announcement by the Prime Minister, flanked by his chief scientific advisors at Downing Street this evening. Plan B is with us, I'm afraid, and that means, for instance, from Wednesday, a COVID status will be essential to enter a building exceeding 500 people indoors and more than 4,000 attendees outdoors. A COVID status, what does it mean? Refers to proof of vaccine passport or a negative coronavirus test. So some admin to do if you want to access, for instance, a nightclub. Joining me now over the phone, Lawrence Barton, owner of Nightingale nightclub in Birmingham. Lawrence, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. What will it mean for you, do you think, this over the Christmas period? Apologies, that line's dropped out. It's always a problem with the phone line, isn't it? You can't see them, you're just relying on what you hear, and sometimes you hear nothing. We'll try and re-establish connections to Lawrence Barton to see what he makes of what's happening to that hospitality sector. In the meantime, and as the NHS becomes increasingly stretched, so runs the logic of what the Prime Minister announced tonight. COVID-19 is not let's not forget, the only illness that can result in large-scale mortality. A report, for instance, from the National Audit Office suggests that up to, the number's mind-boggling, 740,000 potential cancer cases that should have been urgently referred by GPs have been missed since the first lockdown. Let's turn to Professor Carol Sikora now to reflect on this. Again, Carol, but it's one of those things that we can't labour enough, really, can we? As the economists describe it, the opportunity costs of focusing on one thing means the exclusion of others.
Absolutely, Colin, and that's the problem we face. I mean, it is bad news that we've got to this stage. We still don't know if Omicron is serious. That's the crazy thing about it. We certainly know it's more transmissible, that's sure. We also know that it probably, in some cases, breaks through the immune system, so that if you've had the infection before, or if you've been vaccinated, even with the booster, it can sometimes break through. What we don't know, and the key message we need to find out, is how serious it is. At the moment, we've never had lower numbers of people going into hospital every day. The last count was on Saturday, and it was 712 people. So that's really good news. But that was with Delta. What we don't know is what's going to happen with Omicron. Now, preliminary data from South Africa is quite encouraging. That's the only statistic that matters, the number of hospitalizations, because that's why we have to go through these crazy procedures of masks, social distancing, and so on. And nobody knows, not even Imperial College and Neil Ferguson, the chief government advisor on laws, who always Professor Doom on about it. And of course, to go back to what you're talking about, it will impact on the diagnosis not just of cancer, heart disease, and all sorts of other things. People will be nervous and want to cancel routine surgery, and that will lead to delay.
Just to ventilate their argument, they say this is all about, we're back to those old cliches, but they're still valuable, of flattening the curve. And if you don't flatten the curve, you may only have 0.5% of the population that's potentially hospitalised. Some of them will be vaccinated, others not. But 0.5% of millions still puts an intolerable burden on the National Health Service at a time of the year when it's already under pressure. So runs the argument.
That's true. But the problem, of course, by pursuing that, you're scaring a lot of people to not use NHS facilities, not go and see the doctor, not persist, to just sit and lie quietly while they've got weight loss, abdominal pain, headaches, coughing up blood in some cases, and so on. All the symptoms of serious disease. You know, what was dramatic last year was the statistic that really shocked me, that the number of people having heart attacks dropped precipitously from March the 23rd last year for about 6 weeks. It just went right down. And it wasn't that people were not having heart attacks. The number's the same. It's not seasonal. The problem was they didn't do anything about it. They wanted to protect the NHS. So just like cancer, we had this problem. I think the message today coming out from the Prime Minister, who is a libertarian, in all fairness. He wants to keep it. He wants to let us have Christmas. And it's a pretty lax type of process, what's going on here, compared to Austria or Switzerland and so on. We're allowing people to mix. We're not stopping Christmas parties. We better not talk any more about Christmas parties at the moment. But, we're allowing things to proceed. We're not going back to clusters of people meeting in little huddles and having defined groups of people that can meet and those that can't meet. So, it's the best he could do. It's the best of all the gloom merchants that are saying, don't do anything, cancel everything now, because there are people like that out there. Some of my colleagues think I'm being irresponsible, speaking in a libertarian way at a time when safety should be our priority.
Well, I would say, and I think many people would agree, that yours is an important countervailing voice in this conversation. Professor Carol Sikora, as ever, thanks for your time. We mentioned a moment ago that we'd try to get on the phone Lawrence Barton, owner of Nightingale nightclub in Birmingham, to reflect on what this might mean, if anything, for the hospitality sector in the Midlands. I think we can speak to him now. Lawrence Barton, welcome to you. What will it mean, do you think?
I think the first thing to say is that the government's handling of the hospitality sector per se since March 2020 has been nothing short of a disgrace with all of the stop-start. It's been tremendously disadvantaged and it's been appallingly handled. And they've now had almost 2 years to legislate for a passport that's been talked about backwards and forwards to be introduced into nightclubs. And lo and behold, when the government's in crisis over the tremendous hypocrisy that we've seen in the last 24 hours, lo and behold, the passport's announced. It's going to have a detrimental effect, another yet detrimental effect on an already battered sector. The nightclub sector, my nightclub employs almost 70 people. They weren't working for 18 months. And I think the government have had plenty of time to be able to have implemented this long before now and in a much better fashion. It's just appalling.
I do apologise for our viewers, by the way, Lawrence. I was hoping we'd have some pictures of nightclubs so we could reflect on those pictures rather than looking at me nodding approvingly, which is all people have to look at right now. So that's where we are. In terms of how this is applied practically, Lawrence, think of Scotland. Think of the vaccine passport that was introduced by the SNP government there. Think of some of the imaginative ways that people found the loopholes they could exploit. For instance, the idea that people would simply move chairs onto the part of the nightclub so that actually it became a sort of dining area or a part of the bar, not a dance floor.
The implementation of the passport, and let me just be clear that we will comply to it. We won't be looking for loopholes or ways to blag the system. That seems to be what the government seems to be doing at the moment. We will comply to the rules properly. It's just a sad situation that after almost 2 years of the way that we've already been treated and not properly financially supported, that we're now at this hour, just at our most crucial trading time, that we're being affected in a way that other non-essential retail, where they're arguably far more busier than we are as nightclubs on one-off shifts, that we've been targeted. I'm just enraged. I'm enraged by the hypocrisy of it all today. It's do as I say, not as I do. We'll write these rules, but we won't follow them ourselves. And we're just so fatigued and tired of it. The industry feels battered already. So we will comply to the rules and we will ensure that they're followed to the letter, because the bottom line is, if we as an operator can help mitigate the risk against people becoming ill and poorly, although this latest variant, it's very unclear about what the actual implications of that are to people's health. It has so far been muted that the variant, the symptoms are far less severe than the COVID that I've just had, actually, which has been quite horrible to say the least. But I just remain in a state of fury. So I will be working with my colleagues from tomorrow to ensure that a week's time we're ready to open our doors to our customer base. And we're ready to go.
Well, we wish you well with it, really do. Lawrence Barton, thanks very much. So then, on Monday, the train carriages will be deserted again, offices will empty, and the Zoom meeting will return as a fact of life for millions of employees who've been told by the Prime Minister tonight to work from home from the beginning of next week. For people outside the perpetual psychodrama of Westminster politics, these are the things that really matter. And the idea widely put about today that this announcement, this Plan B, is nothing more than a cunning ruse to hide the Prime Minister's blushes about a Christmas party a year ago during a previous lockdown is, I think, frankly, contemptible. Am I being naive? Is Boris Johnson above calling that emergency press conference a couple of hours ago merely to provide him with a political smokescreen? Well, maybe he's not. But anybody looking tonight for evidence of skullduggery is surely on the wrong track. As the government's chief scientific advisors made clear, things are moving with alarming epidemiological speed. SAGE only met yesterday to discuss the spread of the Omicron variant, an iteration of the virus that has more mutations, as we've heard tonight, than anything we've seen hitherto. The number of cases here is doubling every couple of days. Professor Chris Whitty, England's chief medical officer, is not a man, it seems, to lose his head in a crisis. I know there'll be some of you listening to that saying, we disagree. But he looked worried when he mentioned a call he had today with counterparts in South Africa who were seeing a 300% rise in hospitalisations. Again, I accept the situation is there in terms of the number of people who've been vaccinated against COVID, so maybe it's chalk compared to cheese. But it is important to note that there is, as yet, no evidence that this new variant is more lethal than those that have gone before. But its transmissibility, as our political editor Darren McCaffrey was making clear, is in all this the big problem. The quicker it spreads, the more people, vaccinated and unvaccinated, will arrive in hospital, the greater ultimately, potentially, the burden on the health service. So the logic runs. The curve, as the saying goes, must be flattened if we are to avoid trouble. Well, the Prime Minister's instincts are, as he said tonight, that we must learn to live with COVID, but he might have added, just not yet. We can argue about whether he's right to submit football fans, and as we just heard, nightclub owners and patrons to a COVID vaccine passport. We can disagree about the usefulness or otherwise of masks. Many of you think they are absolutely useless. You may well have a point. But on his decision to press the panic button today, we can be clear. This was a Prime Minister acting on scientific advice, not using Omicron as a way of hiding from current political woes. The sight of Westminster journalists insisting that the Prime Minister should be talking about Christmas parties and the resignation of his advisor, Allegra Stratton, will strike some people, I think, as perverse. At one point during that press conference tonight, that's all they wanted to talk about. It was peak media bubble. Only later on did a journalist get around to asking important questions we've tried to address for you tonight, questions rooted in the real world, not the abstractions of the Westminster lobby. Obvious questions like, how will Christmas parties be affected? Will my child still be able to go to school? Can carol concerts go ahead? What about the nativity play? All the questions forming like a collective thought cloud in millions of minds across England, but studiously avoided by a journalistic pack. It seemed from the outside puffed up by its own importance and oblivious to how petty that could occasionally make them seem. Sometimes, when a bigger story comes along, you just have to move on and let the one before die a little bit. That's not letting Downing Street off the hook. It's about showing you understand that in the scheme of things, whether there was a party last Christmas at number 10 is not actually a matter of life and death. To my colleagues at Westminster, I say tonight, do try and get over yourself. Otherwise, there is a very real possibility that the corrosion in public trust you say the Prime Minister's evasions have caused may well be the result of your own obsessions. That's tonight's Brazier Angle. We had a quick poll on this, quick-fire poll. It was only up for, I think, the best part of 30 minutes or thereabouts. Let's flash it up on screen if we can. It's always an indication of how quickly you're voting, how much you care about a subject. Is the government right to ask people to work from home from Monday? I wasn't sure what we would get for this. Overwhelmingly, you think no. 82% of you say no, the government is not right to ask you to work from home from Monday. Dan Wootton is coming up. Do stand by.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Gradually through the next 24 hours, the wind is going to ease. Showers will ease with a better chance of some sunshine in places by Thursday. However, some more rain will move in from the west later in the day. Storm Barra is filling and moving away. As a result, the wind on the whole starting to lessen during the next 24 hours. And any showery rain that's still wrapped around that area of low pressure will also tend to disappear. But it's going to take some time, so further showers in places through the central zones and northwestern areas overnight. A better chance, though, in places of some clear